New York, Queens. A young man sat on the edge of a 7-story old building on the street. The gorgeous sunset covered him with a golden coat. The breeze blew his black hair, revealing a pair of brown eyes. The setting sun is gradually sinking in the sky, and the beautiful moon is rising. Under the cold dim light, a sigh came from the rooftop. A month. It's been a full month since he came here. Although Hong Fei didn't know why he crossed, he finally figured out the bargaining chips he had in his hands. He has inherited a lot of the protagonist's abilities in the game Red Dead Redemption 2, Redemption, which was just cleared before crossing, but it has also changed. The combination of reality and games has given rise to special abilities with a sense of conflict. Doing good deeds can improve his physical fitness, and doing bad deeds will increase the special energy in his body. The only function of that energy is to activate the Eye of Death. Eyes of Death slow down the passage of time, reduce self-inflicted damage, target any part of the enemy's body and automatically mark it as a target, also have additional abilities such as night vision and tracking. This is all the information Hong Fei currently has. This summary is not easy to come by, after all, he doesn't have a system in his mind that can talk and list data. "Sir! I'm here!" A childish shout from downstairs caught Hong Fei's attention. He looked down, and it was a little boy who looked only 6 or 7 years old. Hong Fei made a gesture, then turned around and went downstairs. This building belongs to him. Strictly speaking, this is what he inherited from his predecessor, who in turn inherited it from his deceased parents. According to my memory, in order to inherit this building, Hong Fei in the past paid a high inheritance tax almost after smashing pots and selling iron. It can be seen that Hong Fei is not only a yellow-skinned crooked nut here, but also has no relatives. Taking the elevator to the first floor, you can see a dazzling array of books, and even the air is filled with the smell of real books. Don't get me wrong, Hong Fei dare not identify himself as a scholar. The real scholar had probably gone to another world to live for him. Thinking that the other party had to face the challengers who came in with his gentle heart, Master Hong smiled rudely. "Sir, what are you laughing at?" Bowing his head, the boy held a yellow lunch box tightly in his arms. He blinked at Hong Fei curiously, and there seemed to be a bright light flashing in his eyes. Hong Fei took the lunch box and rubbed his head. "It's nothing, Peter, what's the dish today?" Peter immediately reported the name of the dish to Hong Fei actively. Of course Aunt May prepared dinner, and Peter Parker's Aunt May was already a poor widow. But don't get me wrong, Hong Fei and Aunt May have only met once, but they are very close to Peter, who is 6 or 7 years old. It was more than half a month ago. In order to verify the conjecture, Hong Fei took to the streets to look for a target. On the way, he drove away a few children who were talking strange things around him. Children whose parents have both died can always meet a few unpleasant classmates on campus. In addition, Hong Fei's bookstore was on Peter's only way home, so the two of them became familiar with each other. Every Friday night, Peter packed his own dinner and sent it to Hong Fei. More often than not, Aunt May, who was the guardian, also visited the bookstore by herself, but Hong Fei just thought she didn't recognize her. Sitting at the counter, Peter quietly watched Hong Fei sweeping away all the food, and his face was full of joyful smiles. Getting up and cleaning the lunch box, Hong Fei said, "Let's go, I'll take you home." "Okay." After closing the store door and hanging the sign, the two walked forward in unison, and Peter's hand suddenly slipped into Hong Fei's hand. Feeling the strangeness, Hong Fei raised his eyebrows, and immediately clenched Peter's little hand and led him all the way home, while Peter shook his head happily and his steps suddenly became much lighter. 10 minutes later, the two came downstairs. "Peter, you don't have to come over next week. I may go abroad for a while." Peter said in surprise, "Sir, where are you going?" Hong Fei laughed, "When you go on a trip, it counts wherever you go." "Oh, well, I see." Peter was a little disappointed. "Then, can you tell me when you come back?" Of course, don't you pass by the bookstore every day? Yes. Then I hope Mr. has a smooth journey. Waving goodbye, Hong Fei watched Peter walk into the elevator with his own eyes. When he turned around, he caught a glimpse of Aunt May in a window in the building. After returning, there was still some distance from the bookstore, and Hong Fei had already seen some uninvited guests gathered at the door. When he was getting closer, a young man in a suit and leather shoes, with oily hair and powder face, came out of this group of gangsters. Hong Fei, how are you thinking? The other party's name is Hall, an impetuous young man. Since the day before yesterday, he has been negotiating with Hong Fei about the acquisition of this building, including the land, as the principal of the Fisker Group. However, the price he offered was obviously not enough to satisfy Hong Fei. To be precise, Hong Fei had no plans to sell at all. Seeing that Hong Fei was silent, Hall added, I can raise the price yesterday by another 5%, I have brought the agreement, and we can sign it tonight. You can see the credit immediately, and I can even give it to you. A huge signing fee. Hong Fei's reaction was no reaction. He has made it clear that he has no intention of selling, but Hall turned a deaf ear to it. He believed that Hong Fei was just sitting on the ground to raise the price, and he might even think that Hong Fei was a little ignorant. Yesterday Hall came alone, but today he brought a group of thugs to the door. The threat is obvious at a glance. Hong Fei walked past Hall incessantly, and then recklessly passed through the eyeing crowd, until after he took out the key to open the store door, he turned around and said with a smile, Mr. Hall, I heard that you are not a real lawyer yet. Or? Hong Fei's eyes swept across the group of people behind him, ask your boss to replace someone with a professional. You. Before Hall's anger could be vented through words, Hong Fei had already closed the door with a bang. An African American with dreadlocks squeezed in front of Hall. He shook the baseball bat in his hand and said eagerly, Sir, do we want it? Hall stared at the closed door, gasping for breath, as if he would wave his hand to let the people around him rush in the next moment. But after experiencing a drastic change in his eyes, he suddenly turned around in a hurry and sat in the sports car on the street, leaving behind a group of looking at each other in dismay. In Cyclonus' sports car, Hall clenched the steering wheel fiercely, and muttered, When Mr. Fisk returns, I will throw you into the sea to feed the fish with my own hands. Inside the store, Master Hong, who had just stretched his strength, burst out laughing, turned around and took the elevator to the top floor. Of course, he is not the only one living in this 7-story building. Except for the bookstore on the first floor and the 7th floor for self-occupation, the middle 5 floors are all converted into housing and rented out. Turning on the TV, the talk show host shouted in an exaggerated voice, I seriously suspect that the owner of Maxim magazine is also involved in gambling, otherwise why did they find a pair of twin sisters as cover girls last December? Get Stark 12 women in 1 year. God, I almost jumped off the building. I heard that there was a top prize recently and it was Stark's bag. I have a friend who is already in Las Vegas. Saw him. Hong Fei reduced the sound of the TV a lot, then walked into the bathroom. In the past, the 7th floor was the residence of the Hong Fei family, and the 6 floors below were all bookstores. It's hard for Hong Fei to imagine how much the parents love reading. Until their untimely death, Hong Fei, who sold iron and paid inheritance tax, had to borrow a loan from the bank to rebuild the middle 5 floors in order to recover blood and survive. From this point of view, he was indeed very courageous. Such a change was obviously worthwhile, because it not only allowed him to repay the loan quickly, but also allowed him to live the life that most people in this city dreamed of in the future just by collecting rent. 5 floors, 3 on each floor, 15 rooms in total, 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom, 15 rents, more than some people earning 15 jobs. In addition, if the current Hong Fei is not Master Hong, then he may have sold the old building and the land to the boss behind Hall. The other party offered a lot of money, a figure that Hong Fei could not earn even after collecting rent for 100 years. The reason why they didn't sell is not for sale, but because the actual value of the land is already higher. Leaving aside the value added after development and construction, Hong Fei has neither the plan nor the capital to do so. But the things buried in this ground cannot be measured by money at all. After taking a shower, he went back to the living room and sat down. Hong Fei's dark brown pupils suddenly burst into a rich red glow, which was a sign of the activation of the eyes of death. The moment his eyes turned crimson, all the noises in his ears disappeared instantly. In his field of vision, the originally splendid world faded away in an instant, and in the black and white field of vision, the picture that was playing on the TV began to beat frame by frame. In addition, he could see a dense golden airflow rising up through the floor, almost covering the entire building. What's even more amazing is that Hong Fei could occasionally see an illusory miniature dragon soaring among the golden air currents. Dragon Chi. This is Hong Fei's personal name. If it were hundreds of years earlier, he would have taught those Anglo-Saxons a lesson with this land full of dragon energy. Unfortunately, it's too late. The red glow in the eyes subsided, and the black and white world was once again filled with vivid and bright colors. This is Hong Fei's favorite thing to do recently. It's probably like someone who can't help but peek at his account balance from time to time after he suddenly becomes rich. The appearance of dragon energy is a symbol, and the appearance of the phantom of the giant dragon means that Hong Fei's guess is not an imaginary. Then the only explanation is that there is indeed a keel buried downstairs. There have been many dragons in the Marvel Universe, but relatively speaking, the most well-known is Kunlun's immortal dragon, Shenlong Xiaolao. Of course, Hong Fei doesn't quite agree with the name Shenlong. After all, Xiaolao's image is far from the Shenlong he knows well. Even the winged Yinglong doesn't look like that. Its appearance is more like a giant dragon in the eyes of Westerners. Xiaolao is the patron saint of Kunlun, and it is the manifestation of the power of the dragon. Usually we don't see the great power of Xiaolao. More often, we can only witness it being defeated and giving the power of a dragon to a warrior at the cost of death, and then it itself becomes an egg and reincarnates. Xiaolao will leave behind a keel after his death, and this skeleton will naturally become a treasure of Kunlun. In the long years, Kunlun used the keel to create a weakened version of the elixir of life. Later, there were traitors within the forces headed by Kunlun. These people escaped from Kunlun and continued to live for hundreds of years with the keel brought out. That's right, I'm talking about those things in the Hand Association. Hong Fei doesn't know how many keels it takes to make a so-called elixir of life, but the keels brought out by the traders at the beginning were not too many, but they haven't used up for hundreds of years. Simply speculate and see how maddening a full keel can be. Therefore, when Hall first came to buy this land, Hong Fei was ready to kill him. However, he soon discovered that the other party was really just here for this piece of land. Although Hall is not a real lawyer, he has a father who is a senior lawyer. His father works for the Fisker Group. This is a well-known spice company. Its owner is not only a successful spice businessman, but also a big philanthropist who is keen to help education Wilson Fisk. Hong Fei would have believed it if he hadn't seen the movie and TV. New York's underground forces have many components, and the main members include the Hand, the Russian Mafia, the Mexican criminal group, and the subordinates of the Golden Merger headed by Wilson Fisk. The existence and function of the Keel is the undisputed top secret of the Hand Society. The Hand Union and the Gold Union are not under the command, but a cooperative relationship. If the Shao'er Society discovered the Keel, they would never reveal the news to anyone, especially Jinbing, whose power and influence are in full swing. Assuming that Jinbing already knows and understands the role of the Keel, he will definitely not send a rookie to discuss the acquisition, not even the rookie Hall's lawyer father. He is very likely to be present in person, so if Hong Fei does not agree, then you can also screw off Hong Fei's head immediately. So Hall was able to leave alive 2 days ago, and today brought a group of gangsters to threaten him. Bringing a group of inferior people to do such inferior things, Jinbing, who has already become a big boss, may not be used for a long time. At this point, the context of the whole thing became clear in an instant. The Fisker group really took a fancy to Hong Fei's land, but it was not too big or too small, so the group simply let Hall's father do it. The father who took the task might want to train his son. Or Hall took the initiative to ask. In short, Hall finally got the task. In addition, Hong Fei guessed that Hall may still have the intention of embezzling the acquisition money, otherwise, where would he have the right to directly add 5% to Hong Fei? It can only be that he made up his mind to hold back a lot before, and now Hong Fei has no movement, he was forced to let go. Living in New York, Hong Fei naturally pays attention to Jin Bing. The news that Jin Bing was negotiating the spice business with partners abroad was posted on the official website of Fisker Group. When Jin was not at home, Hong Fei never saw Jin Bing's people in the streets. Come to think of it, Jin Bing was afraid that he was going to do a big business soon, so all the talents from top to bottom suddenly kept a low profile. It is reasonable for Hall not to dare to act rashly, otherwise, if there is trouble, the police will not need to deal with him at all. After analyzing the above information, Hong Fei stopped focusing on this matter for the time being. The next day, Hong Fei got up early and drove a small car to a construction site in southern New York. On the construction site, a burly man was wielding a sledgehammer to hit the gravel. He repeated mechanical movements with steady breath, and his eyes were slightly empty. Castiglione, someone is looking for you. A call came from behind, and he returned to his senses sharply, put down the hammer and turned to look. The foreman pointed to the door of the construction site. The man frowned and instinctively became vigilant. He has no friends now, and no one should know the name he is using. While walking slowly towards the door, he pondered countless possibilities in his heart, and he even thought about whether he would be directly surrounded by a large number of police forces as soon as he showed up. However, today's peaceful life is not easy to come by, and when there is no definite reality in front of him, he does not want to act rashly. Even going to prison is nothing to him. If he can escape once, he can escape a second time. However, when he came to the door and saw the person waving at him, the vigilance in his heart suddenly turned into a stunned expression. Hong Fei was a little excited. Judging from the appearance, the other party completely coincides with the face in his impression. In addition, the walking posture of the other party and the strange look in his eyes inadvertently showed that this person would never be an ordinary worker. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com Frank Custer, The Punisher. After the other party approached, Hong Fei looked at his frowning brows and smiled. Nice to meet you, I've been looking for you for a long time. Frank didn't have a smile on his face, but his already resolute face seemed to take on a lot of seriousness. Who are you? Hello, I'm Hong Fei. Facing Hong Fei's outstretched hand, Frank said unmoved, I don't know how you found me, and I don't know how much you know about me, but... He looked at Hong Fei again and said solemnly. Young man, from this moment on, I hope you forget me, and never mention this second thing to anyone, otherwise, you will regret it for the rest of your life. After all, Frank turned around, obviously wanting to go back and swing the sledgehammer. Hong Fei had anticipated this for a long time, and he said loudly, Castiglione, do you want to slay the dragon? Frank kept walking. Hong Fei, what you are cleaning is only the ants that surround the dragon, but the ants are replenished very quickly, and one day they will still destroy your house. Snapped. Frank stopped and turned his head abruptly. His face was filled with anger immediately. Hong Fei seemed to see the raging flames of revenge erupting in his heart. Frank turned around and stepped forward quickly, looking at Hong Fei's body. How much do you know? Hong Fei put away his smile. I know a lot, I think we can make a deal. Frank's eyes twitched. He looked around and said, why don't we find a quiet place to talk? No problem, but I always think you want to hit me. Are you afraid? A little. It's hard to imagine that Frank Custer, as a prison breaker, did not escape to a remote place, but continued to stay in the metropolis of New York. What is even more surprising is that, as a retired soldier with extremely high military literacy and strong combat ability, he would choose to remain anonymous and swing a sledgehammer on the construction site. Hong Fei thought about it. To be precise, he watched it. After witnessing the TV report about Frank Custer's escape from prison, Hong Fei began to investigate each construction site in New York one by one, and finally determined his hiding place. After walking for a few minutes, the two came to a quiet corner of the construction site. Frank suddenly turned around 5 meters in front of Hong Fei, his eyes sharpened instantly. "Young man, tell me everything you know." Hong Fei's eyebrows twitched. "Are you planning to rob?" "Wrong." Frank opened his arms, as if embracing the whole city. He said, "This city used to have my beloved family and warm family, but these were destroyed by those underground rats. When I tried to win for them through legal means. When I was righteous, I realized that there were more rats on the ground. I heard something." Hong Fei nodded. "You can't even count as a bystander." Frank pointed to the sky disdainfully. "You saw the dazzling sunlight, but I only feel that the sky is dark. I need that information so that those people can accept the punishment they should have. So I won't use this as a bargaining chip in any deal." Frank's wife and daughter were killed. When he used his intelligence network to find the murderer and bring it to justice, the other party used various means to escape the punishment by exploiting loopholes in the law. Since the law cannot bring justice, Frank can only seek justice for his family by himself. At the same time, he will show no mercy to any criminals. So, a good husband, a good father, and maybe even a good soldier, a good citizen, suddenly becomes a criminal. Everyone yells it. He has been in prison once, and now he has only one identity in the public eye, a prisoner who escaped. Hong Fei, I understand your approach, and at the same time I fully recognize your approach. Your thoughts and actions to punish those criminals are also very admirable. To be honest, my intelligence is very rich, but there is nothing in the world for nothing. Lunch. Frank shook his head again. The same sentence. I don't plan to make any deal with you, I do want to eat your lunch for free. Hong Fei spread his hands. Really can't talk. You should have known. The atmosphere suddenly stagnates. During the silence, Hong Fei's eyes suddenly condensed, and there seemed to be a sharp light in his eyes. At the same time, his feet quickly turned from stillness, and the wind was like a galloping horse, crossing a distance of 5 meters in the blink of an eye. Frank's pupils shrank suddenly. He never thought that Hong Fei's seemingly ordinary body would have such a fast speed and powerful explosive power. However, his reaction was also extremely sensitive. He instantly raised all his strength. Facing the sudden attack of Hong Fei, he didn't dodge or evade, but instead unleashed a punch first, pointing directly at Hong Fei's side ear. In an instant, Frank snatched the starting point from Hong Fei, and he punched far and wide, obviously to keep Hong Fei out and not give him a chance to get close to him. Hong Fei raised his fist to block, turned his arm around the joint, and his fist changed into claws to capture Frank's forearm like lightning. Frank stepped back quickly, his arms twisting and trying to escape, but Hong Fei's grip was also very firm. He moved quickly under his feet, and his figure moved with Frank without the slightest bit of stagnation. Looking at Hong Fei's aggressive eyes like wolf-like tigers, Frank only felt a little ridiculous for a while. 2 seconds ago, he thought that the young man in front of him was just a puppet that had been pushed out, and that there was either someone else behind it, or an organization force. However, right now, whether it is the shocking explosive speed of the initial attack, the power of the arm block and the smooth flow between the change of moves, or the pair of extremely aggressive eyes that seem to penetrate the skin in front of them, it all proves that this young man definitely has a decent fighting ability. In Hong Fei's opinion, Frank's reaction is really not slow, and his experience is not bad. With the strength of the opponent, he has indeed crushed the vast majority of ordinary people. But if you really want to comment, then Hong Fei has only 2 words, not enough. In terms of strength, the two may be almost the same now, maybe even Frank is stronger. After all, Hong Fei is no longer his original body. In terms of experience, Frank is an elite soldier, and his life is difficult to calculate. After eliminating the firearms, his bare-handed fighting experience will definitely not be more than that of a martial artist who is immersed in challenges and adventures. If we talk about skills again, Hong Fei really doesn't want to list the things he is proficient in one by one. The main reason is that he has realized from the first day he entered the Marvel Universe that although all the past can still be used as a help in his constant spiritual sustenance, those things are no longer enough to become a real survival dependency. The reality is that some people can fly and hide, some people can carry artillery shells, some people can summon thunder and lightning, some things can annihilate stars with one shot, and some things destroy the universe. Magic is not an illusion, and gods really exist. Master Hong, who became famous at a young age and has not been left behind by the times, is more likely to recognize and accept the reality. Moreover, if he hadn't followed the trend and cleared Red Dead Redemption 2, he wouldn't have come here to face such a reality. Going back to the present moment, Hong Fei has at least a 100 million point advantage in Indiana terms of experience and skills, despite the fact that his strength is not equal. After following Frank's 5 steps forward, Hong Fei's feet suddenly exerted strength without warning, and a deep footprint was immediately thrown out of the gravel ground. He let go of his grasping hand, put his hands between his ribs, and clenched his palms into fists, but when he saw the muscles in his waist and abdomen shrank, his back suddenly opened like a fan made of fine steel, and his strength was as fast as lightning. Transmitted from the ground. The fists are parallel, without precedence, like 2 heavy artillery twisting and blasting. Frank was startled again, and instantly crossed his arms in front of him. The fists and arms collided, and Frank stomped the ground and quickly retreated. He only felt that his arms were sore and numb, and all his strength seemed to be dissipated by this blow. He took a deep breath and then shouted, forcing his spirit revived. Hong Fei stood in place without moving, his feet were rooted into the fine gravel ground, and his palms were placed in front of and behind his chest. Frank narrowed his eyes, took the opportunity to shake his arms to relax his muscles, and at the same time stared at Hong Fei like electricity. For a moment, Frank clenched his fists, his muscles suddenly tightened, and his strength regrouped. This time, he took the initiative to attack, directly striding forward and rushing towards Hong Fei fiercely. When he got close, he ignored Hong Fei's hands, suddenly changed direction quickly and came to Hong Fei's side, and his fist struck like lightning. Hong Fei twisted his toes, turned his body sideways, and grabbed his hands up and down towards Frank's arms. However, Frank's blow was a false move. He quickly withdrew his hand, and the other arm passed through Hong Fei's palms precisely and quickly hit Hong Fei's chest. Hong Fei's body immediately shrank inward, and his curved spine suddenly resembled a full bow. Frank's fist pressed against Hong Fei's chest, but he felt as if he had hit a leaf fluttering in the wind, as if the opponent had been pushed away by the breeze brought by his fist before he actually touched it. Hong Fei's body sank slightly, and his whole body's vigor instantly condensed inward with this extremely simple action, the core of which was the junction of his chest and his fist. Even at this moment, Hong Fei's consciousness quickly became introverted, and his spirit and energy converged at one point at the same time. Bang! Hong Fei's spine was as if he was fully stretched and then loosened the bowstring and returned to its original position instantly. The force of the sudden collapse burst the air into a dull and sharp intertwined sound. Frank only felt that his fist was hit head-on by a rounded hammer, and the knuckles in his palm seemed to be shattered inch by inch under this blow. The muscles on the bones were also torn. At the same time, his body was already shot backwards like a cannonball, and he landed 5 meters away. His strength was still not dissipated. So he could only endure the severe pain in his arm, hold his head and bow his body into a circle, rolling like a ball to release the force. Hong Fei was quite satisfied with the effect in front of him. If Hong Fei could not have achieved this level with his body from a month ago, that scholar's body wouldn't even be considered healthy. In the past month, the gangsters who were thrown at the police station door by him have contributed many times to strengthen the body, making this body initially out of the weak category. Although there is still a gap from the previous body, it seems that it is barely enough for now. Even he didn't open the bludgeon of the Eye of Death. Frank rolled all the way to the edge of the wall before he stopped. He quickly turned over and felt as if his arms had detached from his torso. However, at this moment, he had no time to worry about the injury, and his eyes were like eagles staring at Hong Fei, who was more than a dozen meters away. Reading www.yuyuganshu.com. I saw Hong Fei take a lunge. His upper body was straight like a silver spear, his shoulders sank, his right hand arced to the right and turned into a hook, his left hand turned his palms and pushed forward, and his arms stretched back and forth, like a straightened long whip. Tai Chi single whip. Frank stared suddenly, and a rather jerky word came out of his mouth. Kung Fu. Hong Fei nodded slightly. Come again. Frank's face twitched, he turned his head to look at his drooping arm, and said bluntly, tell me about your deal. Hong Fei immediately stopped with a smile and took the initiative to step forward and said, don't worry, your strength is not strong, your bones are not broken, your muscles are not cracked, it's all an illusion. Within 3 days, you are guaranteed to be alive and well. Frank nodded sullenly. Frank is of course not afraid of a defeat. On the contrary, he thinks that since Hong Fei has such attainments in Kung Fu, he will inevitably form shortcomings in other aspects, just like the firearms he is more familiar with and good at. If he wants to fight for life and death, then he will definitely not use his bare hands. The reason why he agreed was because he wanted the information from Hong Fei more than the outcome. He looked at Hong Fei again, but saw that Hong Fei suddenly raised his brows, and his eyes also glanced behind Frank. The alert Frank turned around immediately, but only saw a grey wall. He asked suspiciously, what are you looking at? Hong Fei saw a card suspended in the air in front of him. It was all snow white, with a faint white light lingering around it. The front of the card was a very delicate portrait. Glancing at Frank, Hong Fei shook his head gently, it's nothing, let's go, I'll take you back for treatment. When he turned around, Hong Fei seemed to stretch his waist unintentionally, his long arms stretched out, but his palms made a plucking action in the air. Don't worry too much. I have practiced Kung Fu since I was a child, and I have played since I was a child, so my experience is definitely a bit richer than yours. But I have changed my mind now. After all, in such a world, the effect of fighting with bare hands only by the body is only useful. It will become smaller and smaller, and it will change in the future, and we have to keep pace with the times. Hong Fei chatted with Frank all the way from getting in the car to getting off, from the first floor to the 7th floor, with almost no parking in between. Speaking of which, you probably don't have a fixed residence right now. Why don't you come to my place? It happens that someone in the building is going to check out. I can give you a friendship price, 30% off. Absolute friendship. While speaking, Hong Fei took a few jars of ointment from the cabinet, and rolled up his sleeves to start. Frank suddenly frowned, is this what you have prepared for a long time? Hong Fei lowered his head and said indifferently, of course, be prepared. After all, don't you know your temper? Frank avoided the plaster in Hong Fei's hand and said angrily, why do you think you can beat me so early? Hong Fei raised his head, blinked his eyes, and spread his hands. Frank was speechless. The results are all out, isn't it obvious? But what Frank cared about was that Hong Fei had already prepared the wound medicine for him before the two of them fought. Does this mean that the other party did not regard him as an opponent at all? Hong Fei rolled his eyes, and immediately said, oh, you misunderstood. This medicine was naturally prepared in advance, but at that time, how would I know whether to use it for you or for myself, in case the loser was me, isn't that also prepared? Master Hong is also considered to be rich in experience. At this moment, if he asks others, he will naturally be able to speak beautifully. Frank also uses his donkey under the to keep silent. After applying the ointment to his entire arm, Hong Fei got up and said, "Once a day, morning and evening, after 3 days, you will recover. You can't move or exert force in the middle. Fortunately, you have another hand, so life is not a problem." Frank sniffed his arm, a strong smell of Chinese medicine. "What kind of deal do you want to do? This matter is a little complicated, even a little dangerous." "Hey!" Frank snorted disdainfully. Hong Fei pointed to the coffee table in front of Frank and said, "There are drafts I wrote before in the black folder, you can take a look first." In the bathroom, Hong Fei dried his hands, turned his fingertips, and the white card appeared instantly. The portrait on the front of the card is Frank Custer. Turning over the card, Hong Fei saw a few lines of text, and after a few seconds, the corners of his mouth rose wildly. Passive skill card, Human Fury, White. When you are seriously injured, your ATK and def will increase by 20% for 30 seconds. After the end, the speed is reduced by 40% for 10 minutes. Generally speaking, this skill is not good, and there is a big gap between positive and negative effects and duration. But the key is that this is a skill card. It was a brand new discovery that Hong Fei had never noticed in the past month. And this card was dropped from Frank. The thoughts in his mind were spinning rapidly, and after a while, Hong Fei got some conclusions. First, skill cards should only be dropped by characters like Frank who can be independently called heroes or villains, otherwise he should have gained something when he taught so many people before. Second, skill cards are clearly divided into active and passive, and at the same time they are divided into colors. The color should directly represent the level. The third question is, can a person only drop one skill card, or will they drop different skill cards multiple times? This can be tried after Frank's injury is healed. Finally, skill cards are not ready to use, but need to be inserted into the card slot first. When he first came into contact with this card, he knew that he had one and only one skill card slot. How to get more card slots? Do not know. But in any case, the discovery of the skill card is very exciting. With only his Kung Fu and the Eyes of Death, there are still limitations to what Hong Fei can do. With the addition of skill cards, it seems that countless branches of the future with no end are suddenly born in front of them. Actually, Master Hong has always been a little anxious. He has never been a person who is willing to entrust his hope and even his life into the hands of others. In the past, his martial arts were enough to protect his body, but now, not to mention one Master Hong, he couldn't hold back 100 more. And as a martial artist, even when he was playing games in his spare time, he never forgot his goal of becoming stronger. Although there are many dangers in the Marvel Universe that have not been encountered before, isn't this heavy danger also full of unprecedented opportunities? If that's the case, what else is there to say? Roll up your sleeves and work hard. In the past month, he has explored his abilities and recalled various information. While beating gangster children to do bad things, he threw them at the police station door to do good deeds. Or long-term plans. Find and convince Frank to be part of a makeshift plan for the group after seeing the other party escape. The next thing that needs Frank's help is the short-term plan. Put away the skill card, calmed his smile, and left the bathroom. As soon as he appeared, he heard Frank's indifferent voice. "I didn't expect you to want to be a terrorist." "Well, Frank, I don't want to say that." Hong Fei glared, and hurriedly added, "The action plan you see is only superficial. In fact, I have deeper considerations." Frank pointed to the TV and said sarcastically, "Can kidnapping an arms dealer actually have connotations?" Tony Stark's speech was playing on TV. Hong Fei continued without looking back, "Superficial. You only see kidnapping in action, but you don't know that I did it to save him." Then why did the action plan not send him directly back to New York, but to other places instead? Hong Fei set fire to the paper in the folder and said as a matter of course, "It's very simple, there is no such thing as a free lunch." Frank's expression worsened when he thought about it just now. "You know, the preparatory work for this plan requires a lot of money. To tell you the truth, I have already applied for a loan. If I don't get anything, I will go bankrupt soon, and then I may have to hand you over to the police. Exchange a bounty." "Frank, you're really frank. I have always been honest." Yu reading www.yuyuganshu.com. Next, Hong Fei directly told Frank about the operational goals and mission requirements called Saving the Arms Dealer, and Frank's excellent military literacy and former intelligence network also reduced Hong Fei a lot of trouble, especially the latter. The information he contributed about all kinds of businessmen all over the world is hard to find quickly if Hong Fei wants to spend money. Until night fell, Hong Fei was extremely satisfied with the rows of contact information in front of him. "Frank, you are really my right-hand man, and you are worth at least $1 billion. Frank smiled coldly, "I just hope you don't break your promise." "Don't worry, when the operation is over, I will tell the truth about the details of all the big gang leaders in New York." "That's good." Frank paused and said, "But I feel like you're not doing it for money at all, right?" Hong Fei said honestly, "No, money is of course my goal, but it's not the whole goal. There are many things that I can't do without money, and some things I can't do with money. I need to grasp both hands, and I need to be hard." "I understand." Frank got up and changed the subject. "Where is my room?" Hong Fei pointed him to the position of the second bedroom, then looked down at a few strings of numbers written down by Frank, and after some thought, picked up the phone and dialed it. After making calls one by one, the length of his account balance also began to jump and shorten. 3 days later, Hong Fei looked at the bald head on his phone giving Tony Stark's acceptance speech, raised his head and said to Frank, "It's time for us to go." Frank moved his arms gently, without any extra expression on his face, just nodded slightly. After packing up, the two of them took a taxi and headed straight to the airport. At noon, Hong Fei and Frank got on a plane to the other side of the world. Frank was wearing a suit, with a neat short inch and a sharp face, and his temperament was suddenly upgraded from a worker to a social leader. Hong Fei's clothes are rather simple. The casual style of clothes makes him look like a college student. "Frank, put on your sunglasses next time you go out and stand behind me." Frank raised the corner of his mouth, "Do you want to be the boss?" "Hong Fei, it's not what I think, it's what I am." "Yes, you are indeed the boss." Frank responded with a smile, but his tone was not sincere. Hong Fei simply put on his blindfold and lay down to rest. The plane took off and crossed the land and ocean. After several flights, the two arrived at their destination Afghanistan more than 20 hours later, and the sky was still bright. After leaving Kabul airport, Frank said, "I never thought that one day I would take the initiative to return to this place. Life is so amazing. Where are you going next?" Hong Fei took a taxi and said, "Of course I'm sleeping. I haven't seen night for more than 20 hours. Checked into the hotel, and the two fell asleep. Go out at 9 o'clock in the evening." The hotel attendant handed a leather bag to Hong Fei. Opening the purse, there were only 2 keys in it. Frank frowned, "Have you prepared this in the past 2 days?" Hong Fei smiled and said, "Don't worry." Leaving the hotel, the two of them walked left and right to the outskirts, where there are few people. There are containers everywhere. Staring at the number outside the box, Hong Fei finally stopped somewhere. After inserting the key, he turned his head and said, "Are you ready for a miracle?" Frank continued to be silent with a sullen face. The iron door made a clanging sound, and it was dark inside. Hong Fei's eyes were slightly red, and everything in the dark night was extremely clear. He snapped the switch, and the light at the top of the box came on immediately. In an instant, an off-road vehicle with a cocky appearance and extremely tough overall lines came into view. This is a good thing. It's discontinued, so it's hard to buy it. Hong Fei sighed and turned to the container next to him. After opening it this time, the contents inside finally moved Frank greatly. From eyepieces to helmets, from pistols to assault rifles, from light and heavy machine guns to sniper rifles, piles of bullets, boxes of projectiles with different functions, RPG shells are stacked from the bottom to the top of the container, and even he also found a mortar behind the full box. Are you crazy? Frank looked at the large amount of military supplies in disbelief. Crazy? Hong Fei raised his eyebrows. I think you have misunderstood me, and maybe even you have misunderstood yourself. What do you think I'm looking for you for? Frank turned his head to stare at Hong Fei, his eyes rounded. What exactly do you want to do? I can help you for information, but there is a bottom line. I know, of course I know, the bottom line is a good thing, and everyone should have a bottom line. I will never break through my bottom line. Do you know what my first code of conduct is? Frank continued to stare at him. Hong Fei, the first rule, when you can't kill, never kill. How about it, is it a little higher than your bottom line? Frank narrowed his eyes slightly and heard what Hong Fei meant. You know, when he moves his hands, he basically doesn't leave a living. The argument came to an end, and the two entered the container and began to reload. When they reappeared, they were fully armed from head to toe, and at first glance, they might be more elite than the special forces of many countries. Without him, it would have taken too much. Hong Fei felt that the equipment with a lot of elements on his body felt novel. In fact, if Frank was not there, he might not even know how to wear this equipment. Frank is an undisputed veteran and an elite soldier with excellent military literacy. He reached out and adjusted the thermal imaging camera on Tiao Hongfei's helmet, and couldn't help but say, it's such a waste to wear such equipment on you. Hey, I said don't go too far, I paid for it. Frank sighed and turned his head to look at the large amount of equipment in the container. After thinking for a moment, he frowned and asked again, what do you want to do? If you don't talk about it now, I can't adjust the equipment. There are only two of us, so we can't. Bring everything with you. It's not impossible. Looking at Frank's serious expression, Hong Fei still held back. This is not a real kidnapping. In fact, our target will be attacked by a wave of local militants first, and our task is to get him back after the attack. I'm not a bird. I didn't say you were a bird, illiterate. Next, Frank began to choose from a large number of weapons. He had the most machine guns and bullets, followed by RPG ammunition. The more Hong Fei looked at it, the more he felt that something was wrong, and in the end he decided to do it himself. Frank stopped immediately. Wait, what are you doing? Help! Are you sure we need that thing? In front of Hong Fei was the only mortar in the entire container. Of course, this cost me a lot of money. Wouldn't it be a waste to leave it alone? Hong Fei said as a matter of course. Frank disagreed. Its power is indeed not small, but we only have one vehicle, and we have to carry artillery shells with it, which will compress the carrying capacity of other weapons and ammunition. It's not much, you must bring it. Isn't it more useful to shoot it than to aim for a long time? This is the core idea that Hong Fei has always upheld. Different from the challenge and discussion, if the purpose is purely to kill, then Hong Fei can give up the use of personal force without any pressure, and turn to the embrace of modern weapons. In the past life, this was also something that Master Hong was very criticized for. For now, that is, if it can be solved with a gun, there is absolutely no need to rob it. The enemy will not stand stupidly and let you shoot the cannonball. You reading www.yuyuganshu.com, then don't let them find out. Can you use it? No, but isn't it with you now? Don't tell me you won't. Besides, we're running out of time, are you sure you want to struggle? Frank sighed heavily and turned his head to continue carrying the ammunition. In the early morning, the vehicle loaded with ammunition set off and drove all the way towards the wilderness. Frank, do you know the exact location? Probably no. There is no possibility in the army. Okay, this isn't the army either. I'm a little regretful that I brought you here. Hong Fei complained, and added, Kuna province is not big, and there are not many armed forces active in this area, but they have the courage. There is only one capable of robbing people from the US military. The scope of their activities in the past is a narrow and long area. Although it is difficult to locate the specific location in the desert and mountainous area, if you add the US military's activity area, the two overlap. A sure way to come out. Frank pondered for a while, then said, even if you're right, how can we find out the exact location of each other? These mountainous deserts are more familiar than we are, and sooner or later will be discovered when we drive. Hong Fei snapped off the headlights. There is only dim moonlight in the dark night, and it is difficult to see from a few meters away. Hong Fei, you can't see it, but I can see it. Also, I forgot to tell you that I'm a mature hunter, and I have unique tracking skills. The Eye of Death was activated again. In addition to the clear black and white picture, there were also unusually obvious white traces in his field of vision. They were spread out straight or twisted on the ground. At the end of the traces, a red body could often be found. That is a nocturnal animal in the desert. The night temperature in the desert is especially cold, and the sub-zero temperature seems to penetrate the flesh and penetrate the bones. Even if the windows are closed and the air conditioner is turned on, the cold air can't stop digging into the car. Frank wrapped his sleeping bag and closed his eyes to rest. Hong Fei's eyes flashed a little red light, and he drove the car quickly in the dark night in the early morning. In the open wilderness, there are almost no traces of other life activities except nocturnal animals foraging for food. This made Hong Fei's tracking easier. Driving on a nearly straight road, Hong Fei's eyes kept taking all the breaths in front of him into his mind for analysis. After a long time, he found a particle cluster made of yellow light on the side of the road. In the game, this often represents the excrement left by a certain creature. Locking on this breath, Hong Fei slammed into the direction, and the vehicle left the road like a beast and rushed into the terrain covered with weeds and gravel. The strong shaking woke Frank up. Seeing Hong Fei's excited expression, he couldn't help but ask, "Have you found it?" 8 and 9 are inseparable. Hong Fei nodded lightly. In front of the vehicle, rows of footprints are very clear. After driving through a low hill, Hong Fei drove the car into a boulder and then stopped slowly. "It's almost there, the other party should be nearby, you can set up the cover, and I'll find someone." Frank nodded immediately. The division of labor between the two was very clear. He used to be a member of the Marine Corps. After getting out of the car, Hong Fei did not carry a rifle, let alone a helmet, because he already had a dagger and a pistol on the side of his right leg. Climbing on a rock, the number of bright footprints in front of him suddenly increased, which meant that the other party used to have frequent activities here. Bending down, taking light steps, he continued to move forward in the direction of the footprints. After a while, Hong Fei found a red figure crawling among the bushes. If the Eye of Death is not turned on, under the dim light at the moment, unless you borrow an infrared thermal imager, it will be difficult to find the other party's trace. Hong Fei lay on the ground and continued to observe with extreme eyesight. Soon he found 5 enemies scattered around, connected the positions of these people into an arc, and then searched for the center of the circle. It was a bare rock mountain. Hong Fei didn't dare to be careless, he stared at the mountain with his eyes fixed, and sure enough, he finally caught a glimpse of a fleeting figure. The red body just swayed a little, and then immediately disappeared like invisible. The cave. Hong Fei was immediately stunned. This is a bit difficult to handle. Since the other party uses the cave as a hiding place, it is difficult for Hong Fei to quickly find out the specific number of people. Judging from the 6 people who are distributed around the other party, it is roughly estimated that they gathered in the cave. I am afraid there are about 20 people. After taking note of the location here, Hong Fei slowly retreated on his back, and only stood up and ran fast until several dozen meters away. Returning to the location of the car, Frank had already set up a shelter. Seeing Hong Fei returning, he said, "Have you found it?" "Well." Hong Fei told the truth about his findings. Frank opened the map with a tablet in his hand, and said, "You said they would definitely attack that arms dealer, then the best place for them to attack is on the road more than 200 meters away from them, where there is a patch of grass. Rock piles and a small hill are enough to hide, and it's the end of a straight road that makes it easier to let down your guard." Hong Fei nodded and asked humbly, "You are right, then where should we lay the trap?" Frank raised his eyebrows. "If you really want to save that arms dealer, then we'd better kill all these militants right now. There are mortars on the car, and I'm sure they will be buried directly in the cave." Hong Fei shook his head. No, if we kill them now, who can prove that they will definitely attack the convoy tomorrow? If they don't admit it, wouldn't we turn from saving people to robbing people?" Frank was a little shocked, and his expression seemed to say, "Isn't it?" Hong Fei slapped his lips. There was no way to explain this. The point is, if Tony hadn't been blown up by his own weapon and had no death threat from free metal shavings, would he still have the motivation to develop a reactor? Without a reactor, what would Hong Fei do with Tony? Is it difficult to find him to sign? What an international joke! Hong Fei pondered for a few seconds, and then said, "It's still according to the original plan. We are not bodyguards, and there is no need to clean the roads for him. After these militants take action, we will reappear." Frank had no objection to this, or he had guessed that Hong Fei would make such a decision. He pointed to the map and said, "Then our ambush location is here." Hong Fei glanced at it and turned to look at the cliff behind him. "This place is the most open, and the straight line distance from the location where the opponent may start is no more than 500 meters, and the opponent will most likely not pass through this area when they start a war, and the exposure probability is extremely low. As long as this place is occupied, no matter whether it is firing or sniping, it can ensure that the opponent has nowhere to avoid." "Very good, just do it." Immediately, the two of them each carried a sniper rifle on their backs, and worked together to transport mortars and shells to the top of the mountain. Seeing that it was still early, Frank took the initiative to say, "You drive the car in the middle of the night, rest for a while, and I'll send a sentry." Hong Fei was not polite. He got into the sleeping bag and put on the blindfold. As the moon sets and the sun rises, the temperature begins to rise rapidly, and Hong Fei is quickly awakened by the heat. He got out of the sleeping bag and saw Frank sitting on the ground carefully wiping the sniper scope. "Looking at your appearance, aren't you afraid that people will call you directly?" Frank said calmly, "They've already gone there and ambushed. 24 people, landmines, machine guns, bazookas, and even a missile vehicle. So diligent." Hong Fei raised his binoculars to look around. His eyes of death opened, and he immediately found the other person's figure hundreds of meters away. 24 people were hiding on the side of the road, far or near, without showing their tracks. The opponent's missile car was parked at the foot of the mountain 1,000 meters away, and it happened to be completely covered by several rolling hills. Frank raised his eyebrows slightly. "It doesn't look like they're going to kidnap, but to kill people." Of course, it was killing people to silence them. Obadiah didn't want Tony to come back alive. It's just that the group of militants didn't kill the lucky Tony at first, but recognized him instead. Therefore, the militants immediately demanded more compensation from Obadiah on this ground. On the other hand, in the principle of making the best use of everything, they forced Tony to build them the Jericho missile that has just caused a huge noise. Unexpectedly, Jericho didn't see it. Tony made the first generation of armor and sent them to C-Max. "You're right, they are indeed rushing to kill people, but they don't know that the target is Tony Stark," an expert in weapon invention, otherwise they would definitely be reluctant. Then you're not afraid that he really died? Then everything you've done will be in vain. Hong Fei smiled and said, of course he will die, but I don't think it will be this time. This is a risk that must be taken. If Tony really dies, Hong Fei will recognize it, and he should spend money to witness a hero who has fallen before he rises. Although it hurts a bit, the ticket price is not too bad. Hong Fei has thought and analyzed it carefully. After all, he can't just run up to Tony and tell Tony that I want to make sure you won't die, and at the same time, I want you to be bombed by missiles? This is so stupid. Even if he helped Tony clear the threat in time, and then figured out a way to get Tony to use his brain to build a miniature reactor, it would still be impossible for Tony to give the reactor directly to Hong Fei at that time, and it would take too long to be sure that the incident would happen. The probability has skyrocketed, which is extremely uneconomical. Therefore, it is most appropriate to hold the time after the opponent is attacked and grab the person directly. When the time came to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Hong Fei, who was eating dry food, suddenly moved his ears, and immediately put down the food and grabbed the binoculars. Sweeping into the distance, he said, "Come on." Frank followed and looked over, and immediately saw 3 armored vehicles approaching quickly one after another from a distance. Through the binoculars and the glass on the armored car, Hong Fei could clearly see that Tony was chatting and laughing with the soldiers in the car. Seeing that the convoy was getting closer and closer to the ambush point of the militants, Hong Fei put down his binoculars and raised his sniper rifle instead. Frank, who was operating the mortar, saw Hong Fei who was lying on the ground holding the gun and couldn't help but said, "Are you sure you can really snipe?" "Of course, I'm a well-known sharpshooter in Shili Baxiang." Hong Fei's confident appearance almost made Frank doubt his own judgment. His eyes flashed and he asked again, "What is the wind direction and how fast?" "What are you talking about?" Frank was suddenly full of black lines. Hong Fei stared at the sniper mirror and said, "Stop talking nonsense, hurry up, it's almost there." On the road, the 3 armored vehicles kept a certain distance and moved forward at the same time, and Tony sat in the second vehicle in the middle. Boom! There was a sudden bang on the plane, and the first car was instantly swallowed by the burst of flames. The violent air wave blew the armored car away, and the fragments immediately shot out towards the surroundings. Tony's vehicle stopped quickly after passing through the thick flames ahead. Suddenly, gunshots were heard everywhere. In Hong Fei's observation, the militants hiding on the side of the road either took out their rifles or set up machine guns to shoot frantically, while some people kept throwing grenades at the remaining 2 cars. The machine gunner on the roof of the armored car was killed immediately, and the US military who rushed out of the car and prepared to defend the counterattack was shot into a sieve before running a few steps. Soon, Hong Fei saw Tony open the car door and ran to hide behind a rock. The missiles in the distance had already started to launch, and the vehicles and corpses were immediately destroyed at the impact point. The scene was extremely tragic. "Frank, get ready, get rid of that missile car first." Rest assured. The US military with less than 10 people was cleared by the militants in a blink of an eye. Tony hid behind the stone, panting heavily, and frantically pressed the phone. "Hey!" The sound of breaking the air went from far to near, and a missile fell beside Tony. After seeing the sign of his home, he just got up and was about to escape. The missile exploded instantly, and the debris and air waves immediately pushed him to fly out. At the top of the mountain, Hong Fei said at the same time, "Let go." Bang! The shells of the 120 mm heavy mortar were fired instantly, and the mortar with a maximum range of more than 7,000 meters can now hit targets more than 1,000 meters away. In the sniper scope, the missile vehicle was instantly engulfed by flames, and the blazing flames rose dozens of meters high. This mutation also immediately alerted the hidden militants on the roadside. They shouted a language that Hong Fei could not understand, and at the same time quickly rushed towards the surrounding flames and smoke, trying to avoid the enemy on this basis. Sight. But Frank wouldn't sit idly by. There was another sound, and after the second shell was fired, it accurately came to the top of a group of militants. Suddenly, in addition to the still huge explosion sound, the shells that exploded in the sky burst out with billowing white smoke, and in an instant, countless small white ons sputtered out. Or a stubborn stone, swallowed by the raging flames in the blink of an eye. At the same time, the figures swept up in flames quickly ran away from the center of the explosion. Even if they were hundreds of meters away, Hong Fei could hear the horrific, one after another mourning. Why is this shell different? Hong Fei was a little shocked. Frank picked up the sniper rifle and took aim. White phosphorus bomb, it can stick to any surface and burn continuously, and it is difficult to be extinguished. If it falls on a person's body, it will burn through the skin and even burn the bones of the person. All burnt to ashes. Hong Fei took a deep breath. Is this too? Boss, this is war. Frank said coldly. Afterwards, he aimed at the target and said again, there are 6 more lucky ones. Give me the 4 on the left, and give you the 2 on the right. If you can't, speak up in time. Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, he directly pulled the trigger, and a person in the distance fell in response. Hong Fei quickly restrained his mind, his eyes gleaming red. Immediately, 5 militants who were running wild were performing comical movements one by one in his field of vision. After the muzzle swept across their heads quickly, they left scarlet cross marks one by one. The 5 people finished marking in an instant, and Hong Fei immediately pulled the trigger. Bang 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 bang! The semi-automatic sniper rifle fired 5 shots in a row. 5 bullets ripped through the air and flew away, and before the sound of gunfire fell in the desert, the 5 fell almost in no particular order. At the same time, Hong Fei could feel that there were clearly 5 energies pouring into his body one after another. At this moment, Frank, who was aiming at the second person, watched his target suddenly fall down. He was startled by the sound of gunshots in his ears. He turned his head and saw Hong Fei smiling at him. You're welcome. Frank raised his gun again in disbelief. After a long time, he put down the gun, still unable to hide the shock in his eyes. How did you do that? Hold the gun, aim it, pull the trigger, and do it all in one go. I told you just now that I am a well-known sharpshooter. The eye of death is perfect for long-range sniping. Regardless of the distance, as long as it can be marked and there are no obstacles in the way, the bullet will inevitably cross the distant space and hit the marked point directly. Don't tell me about wind direction, wind speed, humidity, and don't tell me about gravitational ballistic measurements. In a word, if you raise your gun, you do it. For Hong Fei, sniping is much easier than Kung Fu. Frank's expression was extremely complicated. Hong Fei got up and carried the gun on his back. Let's go, it's time to withdraw, the US military will come later. Frank returned to his senses and said in a low voice, you go down first, and I'll pack up the mortars. Such a heavy guy, let me help you. Frank declined, no, after you go down, go to the car and find 2 gas masks to take with you. If it's later, the target may be poisoned to death. Okay. I forgot to mention just now that the smoke from the explosion and burning of the white phosphorus bomb is highly toxic. Hong Fei ran away. Half an hour later, Hong Fei asked as he drove, how is it? It's not poisoned, right? The unconscious Tony was lying on the back seat, his whole body was almost dyed red with blood, and his face was even more pale and a little scary. While giving first aid, Frank said, it's not poisoned, the wind is just blowing the poisonous smoke to the other side, otherwise he would have died. Hong Fei breathed a sigh of relief, and then said again, no more white phosphorus bombs are allowed in the future. Are you afraid? Frank didn't hide his mockery. Of course, Hong Fei was not afraid, but thought that such a killing method was too inhumane. But before he could speak, Frank continued, do you know what these people have done? They will use dull knives to cut off enemy heads bit by bit, they will slaughter an entire village, and they will publish these videos to showing off their force online, and you think they don't know what they're doing? I can tell you clearly that they even enjoy the act of inflicting violence on others." Hong Fei was silent. After a long time, he said, "Even if it is used, it should be restrained as much as possible to avoid abuse. The effect of the white phosphorus bomb is too brutal. If the white phosphorus bomb just fell into a crowd gathering point such as a town, the scene would be more than 10 times crueler than a pure bomb explosion. That has already left the category of destroying the enemy's living power in war, and half-footed into the gate of anti-humanity." Frank shook his head and said, "Don't worry, I'm afraid it won't work if you want to use it in the future. The power of white phosphorus bombs will cause physical and psychological trauma to both sides of the war. Now few people produce white phosphorus bombs. You buy this one. The only white phosphorus bomb that the other party has, I guess it should be half sold and half delivered stock. You gave the supplier's contact information. I only know that he ships in the Middle East, but I don't know who he is. Anyway, he won't be a good person." On the plane, Hong Fei, who had changed into his combat uniform, was resting on the seat. On the other side of the door, he was undergoing a risky operation. In this operation, because there was a subjective motive to kill and a real action took place, there is no doubt that there are many elements of bad things. The energy in Hong Fei's body increased by nearly 1/5. Behind the considerable growth is a lot of capital consumption. Because he turned a blind eye to Tony's distress and let it go, even saving people was not considered a good thing. As for the skill card, Tony's injury was not directly caused by him, so naturally there was no drop. Frank sat opposite Hong Fei and frowned all the time. His already stern appearance looked even more ferocious. "What's wrong?" Frank said without moving, "I'm thinking about what kind of people the world needs." Hong Fei was a little surprised. "When did you suddenly become so advanced that you started thinking about philosophy?" Frank glanced at Hong Fei. "You just paid money to make that airport turn a blind eye to a vehicle apparently loaded with weapons and ammunition, and they even put you on the plane themselves. What if you were a drug lord?" Hong Fei immediately sat up straight. "I solemnly remind you once again that this kind of thing is absolutely unpleasant to say in front of me. Otherwise, you will be covered in red hair and lose your mind. It will never have anything to do with what you said." Frank rolled his eyes and simply lay back. Hong Fei also lay back again, and after a long time, his voice sounded again in the cabin. "Actually, the world doesn't need anyone. It's only people who need someone with a certain element. Like the officer in charge of that airport, he needs rich people. In a warden place like that, he doesn't need any. You need to care whether you bring a gun or something else. He sent me on the plane to supervise me not to take it out at the airport. As long as I don't use the tools to collect money, he can greet me with a smile on the face of the banknotes. Deliver." Frank didn't say a word, and Hong Fei continued, "You can be what the few need, or the many, and even make your enemies need you when necessary, but you can never be everyone at the same time. People who need it." In the continuous silence, Hong Fei gradually fell asleep. He didn't wake up again until the door behind him opened with a beeping sound. A middle-aged doctor took off his mask, bent over and smiled in front of Hong Fei. "Mr. Hong, the operation was successful. According to your plan, we have successfully blocked the fragments in the patient's body from continuing to move. Although you are not a doctor, you born with the potential to become a famous doctor." The compliment from the other party did not make Hong Fei happy, because the price offered by the other party in advance was enough to wipe out any smile from Hong Fei. Picking up the phone, Hong Fei said, "The balance has been paid, you should check it yourself." When the doctor saw the transfer reminder on Hong Fei's mobile phone, his smile became even brighter. "Mr. Hong, thank you very much for your trust, and I look forward to our next cooperation." "Forget it, please don't afford it." "Me too. You've worked hard, you go down and rest first." The other party left gracefully. and when he turned around, he nodded to Frank again. Obviously they knew each other. After the doctor left, Hong Fei pouted and asked, "How did you know him?" Frank said bluntly, "He has taken bullets for me many times. In fact, he has always been a skilled surgeon, but he will not refuse any bribe, so he was fired. If there is a need for surgery in the future, he will be fired again. If it is not convenient to go to the hospital, you can still find him." Hong Fei immediately refused, "Forget it, I don't have that many 2 million. That's right, the other party's appearance fee is not much or not, $2 million US. It's expensive and expensive, at least he won't betray you." Hong Fei shook his head, "I'd better find a long-term hire myself. Speaking of which, I really have a candidate." "Oh. A beautiful woman, and also a scientist." Frank immediately sneered, "I don't think she's willing to work for you." Hong Fei also sneered, "I don't need her willingness." The bickering between the two ended when the plane began to land. After the plane landed, the medical staff who had been waiting at the airport immediately carried down Tony, who was tightly wrapped in gauze, on a stretcher. "This is a necessary means of confidentiality." The doctor said goodbye to Hong Fei again. The smile on his face was so sincere. After getting off the plane, Hong Fei gritted his teeth and stared at Tony, who was still in a coma. "Do you know how much I spent? More than 30 million, DOLE. It's not Vietnamese dong. If I can't earn at least 10 times from him, I will definitely send him away." "Frank, where else can I send it?" "Hell." A rare smile appeared on Frank's face. He patted Hong Fei's shoulder and said, "Don't be so angry, at least you made me experience the happiness of being rich for the first time in my life. Think about it, from Afghanistan to Sokovia, countless unfamiliar faces are serving you along the way, although you don't know anyone, and they are seeing you for the first time, but each of them regards you as the most honorable boss." After leaving the airport by car, the group did not enter the city, but drove towards the mountain. "Where is this going?" Frank was puzzled. Hong Fei looked out the window. Through the layers of dense forest, a grey-white castle building on the top of the mountain was exposed. "Have you seen that castle?" "Okay." Hong Fei said calmly, "Mine." Frank was shocked again. "Don't you have no money?" "Yes." "Then why do you still have a castle?" Hong Fei looked at Frank with contempt. "How expensive do you think a castle is? It's not even as expensive as the appearance fee I paid that doctor. The castle cost just under $1.5 million. You reading www.uuganshu.com. The castle needs to be maintained. Although he bought the castle, Hong Fei also needs to bear the responsibility of maintenance while having the right to use it. This fixed annual cost may be more expensive than the purchase price." The reason why he bought it was not that Hong Fei was fascinated by the vastness and scenery of the castle, nor was he ready to start seclusion and enjoyment after finishing the ticket. It was because he needed money to save himself a lot of trouble in such a barren and small country, while at the same time having a large space that was sufficiently private. Sokovia's castle. As you can tell from the name, it perfectly meets Hong Fei's requirements. The convoy stopped after entering the castle, and Hong Fei and Frank walked straight to the blue stone wall. Outside the 1-meter-high fence is a cliff, and below it is a vast lake. This castle, with a history of more than 500 years, is built on the mountain, covers an area of more than 5,000 square meters, and is magnificent. In addition to the nearby lake, the other side is the emerald green river valley. Looking up at any place in the castle, you can catch a glimpse of the snow-capped mountains in the distance. It has both historical heritage and stunning scenery. $1.5 million, is that expensive? It's so expensive. Because the actual price is at least 1.5 million per year. Hong Fei only hoped that Tony could quickly tinker with the arc reactor, so that he could sell the castle as soon as possible. After dismissing a group of temporarily hired people, Hong Fei and Frank sent Tony into the underground space of the castle, which is a very hidden secret room, which is very suitable for Tony's workplace in the future. Next, we're going to play a show with the arms dealer. You're going to be the bad guy, and I'm a. Why didn't you play the bad guy? Frank was a little dissatisfied. Hong Fei lowered his head and groped for a long time. Frank couldn't help saying, "What are you looking for?" "I want to find a mirror, so that maybe you can have a clearer understanding of yourself." Frank's face turned black. In the end, Frank was assigned the role of the leader of the militants by Hong Fei, while he himself restrained his martial spirit and became a real ordinary young tourist. When changing clothes, Hong Fei said again, "When will your old buddies arrive? We can't always be the two of us. That arms dealer is very smart, and maybe he will soon become suspicious." The old man he was referring to was Frank's former comrade in arms. Frank's service period was not short, and he went through many troops, and finally he was in the Marine Corps before he retired. And many of his former comrades have retired, and these people are rare resources. Frank said calmly, "You can't be in a hurry, you must identify truly credible people. People will change. I don't know if they still treat me the same as before. It makes sense. We don't need too many, 5 or 6 are enough. After all, this is not about going to the battlefield." In the secret room, Tony has woken up. The gauze on his head has been taken off by Hong Fei, so there is no need for him to continue to hide his appearance here. With effort, he opened his heavy eyelids. Tony's eyes were a little dazed. After glancing around in the dark secret room, his eyes gradually fell to his chest. Under the gauze, 2 wires extend all the way out, and finally connect to the battery next to the iron bed. Tony was shocked for a moment. He propped up his weak body and sat up halfway. He tore the gauze on his chest. Suddenly, he saw a circular metal device embedded in the flesh and bones in the center of his chest. Bang! He immediately lay back on the bed, his eyes wide open, his mouth was breathing heavily, and his face was full of disbelief. Seeing this scene through a hidden camera, Hong Fei, dressed in casual clothes, gestured to Frank, who had shaved his head and wore a black scarf, and the two walked to the door of the secret room together. After a while, the sound of keys slamming came from outside the secret room door. With a sour sound, the door of the secret room was pushed open a crack inward. Tony leaned over his arms and looked over. Boom! Suddenly there was a muffled sound, and a figure suddenly flew into the room. His waist was bowed into a shrimp suit. After flying a few meters, he fell to the ground with a thud. Following Tony, he heard a violent cough mixed with exclamations of pain. At the door, Frank wearing a black mask slowly retracted his legs. Hong Fei lay on the ground and covered his abdomen, feeling that his intestines were about to break. The original discussion with Frank was that Frank only needed to make a general movement, and he could fly out by himself, but Frank suddenly put out his legs with all his strength. Even if Hong Fei reacted in advance, he could stand at the door of the secret room. If you can't activate the Eye of Death and fight with Frank, wouldn't that just break the character design? Frank publicly avenged his personal revenge, and Hong Fei immediately wrote it down in his notebook. Tony first looked at Hong Fei in astonishment, then turned his eyes to the door. When he looked at Frank, he instantly saw the murderous aura in the other's eyes, and the wrinkled flesh on the shiny forehead was even more so. Not looking like a good man. Frank stepped forward. Tony Stark, the world's most famous arms dealer and weapon inventor. I saved you. Tony was stunned by Frank's words. Upon seeing this, Frank took out a few photos, which were the images of the attack on the U.S. military convoy and his being stunned and covered in blood. Of course, the corpses of those militants were among them. We helped you kill those militants, performed surgery on you, and pulled you back from the hand of death. We did save your life, and now I wonder, how will you repay me? Tony's face slowly changed, he understood what Frank meant. I'm very grateful that you saved my life. I think I need money more than thanking you. Why don't you please send me to the US military base, and then I will give you. With a swish, Frank interrupted Tony by dropping a stack of photos again. Tony looked down and saw that it was the photo of the Jericho missile and the scene of the explosion experiment. Frank poked the photo with his index finger. This missile is very good, can you give me all the information about it? No. Tony categorically refused in a light tone. Frank didn't see the slightest sternness in his eyes, but he suddenly raised his arm and aimed a punch at Tony's cheek. Tony was hit so hard that gold stars appeared in his eyes, and blood dripped from his mouth. Frank didn't say much, grabbed Tony's neck with one hand and dragged him off the bed. No matter how hard he struggled, he couldn't escape the hold of that big hand. The wire on Tony's chest dragged the battery on the ground and rubbed it on the ground. Pulling it hard obviously made him more painful. Hong Fei watched in horror from the side, for fear that Tony would be killed by Frank, a thug. Tony was dragged to the other end of the secret room like this, and with a click, another light was turned on, illuminating the pile of horrible-looking torture instruments in the dark area. Before Tony could even panic, Frank pressed his head into the big water tank. After going back and forth several times, he felt that his soul seemed to have left the body, leaving only a walking corpse. Frank flicked his hand, and Tony was thrown to the ground roughly by him. With one foot down, Tony arched his waist with severe pain in his abdomen, and clear liquid spurted out from his mouth. 1 month, I will give you 1 month, in addition to all the materials, I want you to make one by yourself, during which I can meet any of your needs, but if I can't see anything after a month, I will chop your head off and throw it at the door of the US military base. After Frank finished speaking, he turned and walked towards Hong Fei. He kicked Hong Fei with his foot and said, "You better pray that someone is willing to pay the ransom for you." Hong Fei was so frightened that he shrank to the corner and hugged his hair on the spot. With a bang, the iron door was locked again. For a while in the secret room, there was only the sound of rapid gasping and whimpering from the two of them. After a long time, Tony slowly came over. He carried the battery back to the bed and lay down again, looking at the low ceiling. He said in a hoarse voice, "Boy, who are you? Do you understand English?" Hong Fei huddled in the corner without saying a word. "Whether you understand it or not, I have to tell you now that even if someone is willing to pay the ransom for you, that vicious guy will still kill you." Hong Fei raised his head abruptly, his eyes filled with horror. Tony turned his head and glanced at him, and raised the corner of his mouth disdainfully. "You know you're afraid? Tell me, where did you come from and how did you get caught here?" Hong Fei hesitated for a while, then whispered, "I'm from New York, I just want to travel around the world, I didn't expect to be knocked unconscious on the street here, and when I woke up, I was already standing at the door out." "New York?" Tony rolled over. "Then you must know me." "Yes, I know you, Tony Stark, a playboy." "Ha, you reading www.yuyuganshu.com is right, the media reports in this regard are quite true." After speaking, Tony sat up. "Boy, listen to me, there are only the two of us here, in other words. We are now in a relationship of mutual dependence. Tell me, do you want to live or not?" Hong Fei nodded quickly. "Tony, very good, I also want to leave here alive, come here." Hong Fei got up slowly and approached Tony tentatively, as if he was afraid of being beaten up by Tony suddenly. Tony couldn't bear Hong Fei's dawdling look. He stretched out his hand and pulled him directly in front of him, his two faces almost touching. "Just listen to," Tony whispered, "listen to me. Just when the dead bald head almost trampled me to death just now, I suddenly had an idea in my mind. I have a way to escape from here, but you know me in the current situation, I need someone to help me, can you?" "Here." Hong Fei's obedient appearance is really worrying. Tony slapped Hong Fei's head and said sharply, "Do you want to live? Do you want to see the sun in your life?" Hong Fei was stunned. He secretly recorded the account in the notebook, and then he nodded firmly, I think so. Very good, then we are allied. From now on you will do whatever I ask you to do, and you are not allowed to ask me why. Our time is short, and there must be cameras here, so don't be in front of each other exposed. When we leave here, I will definitely throw a huge party for the two of us, and you can be the protagonist with me. Hong Fei's expression was very moving, but he was very contemptuous in his heart. I don't want to go to your party full of corrupt capitalism. The next day. Humph, actually inserting a magnet into my body, and also using a bulky battery as an energy source, it's stupid. Tony complained and wrote down the list of materials he needed. Hong Fei sat in the corner silently, looking like he was depressed. In fact, Tony's surgery could have been better, but Hong Fei didn't need it. Tony said again at this time, don't worry, if your family is not willing to pay the ransom for you, I can pay you, but you have to go to Stark Industries to work for me to pay off the debt. I have no family. Hong Fei suddenly said. Tony wrote a meal, and soon returned to normal, only to hear him say, no, can't you live alone? Don't worry, I'll pay your share. If that guy wants to tear up the ticket, I'll say you are my assistant now, I guarantee you will not die. Hong Fei sighed secretly, if Tony continued like this, he would be embarrassed. The only thing that can repay Tony is to help him clean up the rebels in his house. Well, that bald head might drop a skill card, right? Soon after, Tony kept slapping the iron door to attract Frank. After handing the list to the other party, Tony said again, I can give you the information, or I can make one for you now. But I need better treatment. At least, I wish I had something dry at every meal. Frank's fierce eyes made Tony unconsciously modify his original request. Hearing this, Frank glanced at him coldly, then closed the door and left. Tony immediately complained unhappily, I guess someone like him has no friends. Tony's proposal was obviously effective. During the second meal, Tony and Hong Fei ate canned meat from the US military. Here, Hong Fei was having a good time, and the vicious Frank suddenly rushed in again, and without saying a word, he picked up Hong Fei and walked out. Tony on the side was startled when he saw this. He quickly put down the food and stepped forward to stop him. Wait, what are you doing? Where are you taking him? Frank didn't say a word, and pressed his big hand directly on Tony's face to push him away. But Tony rushed up again reluctantly, wait a minute, he's my assistant, I need him, there are some things I can't do alone, I need someone to help me. He can't die. After he bluntly dropped a sentence, Frank still took Hong Fei away. Back upstairs, Frank put down Hong Fei, and Hong Fei immediately said solemnly, what happened? People are here. Hong Fei was taken aback, who? Frank said with a cold face, helps, there are 5 in total. They all went bankrupt soon after they retired, and some even separated from their wives and had a very bad life. They are very willing to accept the work you arranged, and even more willing to do more. Hong Fei was stunned. Soon, Hong Fei saw these 5 people in the castle. They stood in a row with their hands behind their backs, everyone was wearing black suits, and it was difficult to see the difference in height with the naked eye. However, their body size is not considered strong, it can even be said to be thin. Thinking that they might have been homeless and unemployed before, Hong Fei didn't ask any further questions. Frank took the initiative, they were all soldiers, and they were all my soldiers. Although the overall quality is not as good as the Marine Corps, each of them has personally experienced the baptism of war. In addition, I can guarantee that they are not traumatized. Post-stress disorder. Hong Fei nodded slightly and looked at the 5 people one after another. The other party was also looking at Hong Fei, the new boss, curiously, but neither of them showed any strange expressions. After all, what they need now is a stable job and income. My name is Hong Fei. I'm very happy that you can join, I'm really happy, because you probably already know that there are only me and Frank in this huge castle, and you, everyone has what I have in them. The characteristics you need. What you need to do now is very simple. You don't need to go to the battlefield with guns, you don't need to brave the hail of bullets to charge, all you have to do is change into a suit, and then go to perform a real drama. Suddenly, a high-pitched voice sounded, "Report, boss, I can go to the battlefield." "I can too. I can do it too." Afterwards, the others were not far behind. Hong Fei turned his head to look at Frank, and when he saw him nodding, he smiled and said, "Your fighting spirit is admirable, but it's too early to say these things. Let's do the things in front of you first, but I can at least guarantee that you don't. I will live my old life again." After all, Hong Fei turned around and left, and Frank quickly caught up with the five after giving instructions to the five. "What do I need to do next?" Hong Fei smiled slightly, "Call me, we should surprise the big client." Obadiah's contact information, Hong Fei, had long been found in Tony's cell phone. "The first time I called, the other party hung up, the second time it was the same, until the third time the other party finally picked up." "Who are you looking for?" Hong Fei smiled and said, "Mr. Obadiah, at noon. Oh no, it might be night over there, good evening." Afterwards, Hong Fei heard a rustling voice on the other end of the phone, as if Obadiah had sat up from the bed. "To be honest, I don't like others to betray me." "Very well, so do I. Then you have to listen carefully. Stark is in my hands. I sent you an email to prove the truth. You remember to read, if you want him to be able to go back safely, then prepare 5 billion bearer bonds or gold, then wait 24 hours for my call, and next time you hang up, I'll cut a thing off Mr. Stark once you hang up." Snapped. Hong Fei directly hung up the phone and turned off the phone before putting it back into Frank's hands. "Wait, don't you want a ransom? Why don't you wait for him to speak? And what you just said was 500 million. Of course I want the ransom." You reading www.yuyuganshu.com. 500 million is because I feel that I have suffered too, so I want to increase the compensation, not waiting for him to speak, because I want to give him a time to think deeply. Frank was puzzled, "What do you mean?" Hong Fei didn't answer and asked, "Do you think Obadiah wants Stark to go back?" Frank frowned, as if thinking of something. "Not everyone knows Stark's whereabouts, but he was attacked under the of the US military. Even you saw it. Those militants were not prepared to stay alive in the first place." With a smile, Hong Fei said again, "Tony Stark's parents passed away a long time ago, and this Obadiah is the closest person to him. But the problem is, Obadiah doesn't think so. If there is no Tony Stark, then can't he become the owner of the entire company logically? Why should he be subordinate to others when he can be the master? So, you want Obadiah to tell you the fact that he wanted to kill Tony Stark?" Hong Fei said with a smile, "Yes, I can adjust the price a little higher. After all, kidnapping and murder entail completely different risks, which is very reasonable." Frank thought for a while and then said, "But I don't think you want to kill Tony Stark at all. Of course, if he dies, who am I going to ask for the second money?" "What second money?" Hong Fei waved his hand, "Okay, you're not joking, why are there so many questions? Send it back to me quickly, and I have to continue to cultivate trust with Tony. Alas, what a pity this castle is. It's already mine, but I can't enjoy it for a moment, it's just unreasonable."